Shortly before the outbreak of World War II, the Japanese were already preparing to conquer the Pacific. However, the United States stood in their way. The Japanese Imperial Navy then resolved to build the most powerful battleship ever conceived by any nation, one that would be able to face the intimidating naval power of its adversaries. The Yamato-class battleship Musashi was secretly built in the Nagasaki shipyard just in time for the Pacific War. Musashi was deemed unsinkable and unmatched by her rivals and was conceived to take down American battleships, if only she could find them. During her 2-year run, the battleship sailed the northern and central Pacific seas, always ready to engage the enemy, and was present in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. However, the Battle of Leyte Gulf in October of 1944 finally gave her an opportunity to prove herself, but the Japanese made a crucial mistake. It was one of many that even included flooding the town that gave birth to her. Standing up to the enemy. Following the catastrophic events of World War I, the world leaders wanted to prevent another war at all costs. One measure to achieve this came in the form of the Washington Naval Treaty, an agreement between the United States, the United Kingdom, France, Italy, and Japan to limit the size and number of warships they could build. The agreement was ratified in 1923 and soon after recognized by the League of Nations. However, Japan was not happy with it. Japan had taken an isolationist approach until the Treaty of Kanagawa in 1854 and was still recovering from the trauma that this agreement caused the nation. At the time, U.S. President Millard Fillmore ordered Commodore Matthew C. Perry to pressure the Japanese. With 9 ships and 3 steam frigates, the Commodore couldn't level Tokyo, but the Japanese never forgot. Consequently, the Japanese naval doctrine now stated that they needed a fleet that amounted to 70% of the Americans' capacity. However, the Washington Naval Treaty only allowed them to possess 60 ships for every 100 American vessels. The proud Japanese people were not happy with a measure that rendered them defenseless and thus rejected the agreement, resolving to defy it. However, they did not receive significant pushback. Under the administration of President Woodrow Wilson, the U.S. was expanding its navy while adhering to the limitations stipulated in the agreement. And while the nation was not yet at the peak of its development in the early 20th century, the Japanese produced merely 18% of the superpower's gross domestic product. An open arms race against the mighty Americans would certainly cripple their economy. The Japanese concluded that only a powerful fleet could protect them, but they currently had roughly 55% of the equivalent American capital ships. At the mercy of American gunboat policy, or even the threat of becoming another European colony, they came up with a straightforward solution: to build a battleship able to intimidate even the Americans. The Yamato-class battleships would need to be superior to their U.S. counterparts, with unmatched magnitude and weaponry. If they couldn't overpower their adversaries in number, they would do so in size. Musashi. A design competition was announced in March of 1937. The requirements included a colossal vessel that could carry at least 8 18.1-inch guns and withstand a hit from these same guns. Captain Kikuo Fujimoto's Plan Number A-140F6 eventually emerged victorious. Fujimoto's vision was a gigantic floating fortress that could travel at 27 knots with a range of 7,200 nautical miles while displacing almost 72,000 long tons at deep load. In addition, flood control compartments would keep it seaworthy. The ship was 862 feet 10 inches long, with a 127-foot 7-inch beam and a 30-foot 1-inch draft. The beam was wider in the center, leaving the bow and stern unarmored. Still, the hull featured the heaviest armor ever used on a ship. The behemoth was more heavily armored than any British or American ship, with 3 triple-gun turrets of 45 caliber 46cm Type 94 guns, the largest naval guns in the world. A secondary battery consisted of 12 60 caliber 15.5cm third-year type guns mounted on 4 triple turrets. A dozen 40 caliber 5-inch Type 89 dual-purpose guns and 6 twin turrets provided stout anti-aircraft defense. And the ship also carried 36 1-inch Type 96 light anti-aircraft guns in 12 triple-gun mounts, and 2 twin mounts for .52-inch Type 93 machine guns. Shipwreck hunter David Mearns would say, quote, "She's not just 10% bigger than some of these other vessels, she's nearly double." The Yamato-class battleships would become the heaviest and most powerful ships of their kind ever built. Flooding a town. Yamato and her younger sister Musashi had to be kept secret. The battleships were thus built in different stages at different locations. Before even starting to build Musashi, the construction spillway had to be reinforced and the workshops enlarged. To carry her weight, specialized cranes also had to be built. Then, on March 29, 1938, Musashi's keel was laid at the Mitsubishi shipyard in Nagasaki. However, there was a significant issue. The USS Consular Office stood right across the bay, and to convey the construction site, a huge curtain had to be woven with hemp rope. The country's entire rope stock was used. In late May, a squadron of Chinese-marked bombers piloted by Russians overflew the city while dropping propaganda leaflets, but it was evident that there was more to their venture. However, when the spies shared their images with the Americans, they were not interested in taking part, as there was no war yet. 2.5 years later, on November 1st, 1940, Musashi was launched. To keep the event a secret, officials used the excuse of an air raid drill and sent all residents home. Roughly 2,000 elements of the local police, the military police, and the Sasebo Sailor Corps patrolled the streets, ensuring that no one left their properties. Meanwhile, a huge freighter was stationed at the bay to conceal the launching site from the coast. At 8:55 a.m., the nobles and high-ranking officials attending the occasion finished their prayers, and the immense battleship was launched into the bay's shallow waters. However, the maneuver was not as silent and discreet as the engineers had hoped. When Musashi broke the surface, it displaced a considerable amount of water, creating a 4-foot-high tsunami. The harbor was battered, and the narrow rivers were forced to flow upstream, capsizing several fishing boats. The water then gushed up to street level and poured into several houses and shops. The locals were scared and stormed out of their homes in panic, but the officers quickly forced them back inside. The town eventually went back to normal, and after the unforeseen setback, Musashi sailed to Sasebo to be fitted out. The Japanese King Kong. The Japanese engineers and Navy officers were convinced that such a gigantic vessel ought to be unsinkable. As former crew member Masahiro Ohishi recalled, quote, "We never thought for a second that Musashi would sink. We believed that such a giant ship could not be taken down." Musashi was even compared to the popular character of King Kong. The ship was likened to the beloved figure to win public support, as the Hollywood film was a hit with Japanese audiences. What's more, the movie was believed to convey a deeper meaning that aligned with the Japanese state of mind. In the words of historian and author Martin K.A. Morgan, quote, "It is not just a comparison evocative of power and strength. It's also kind of pointed squarely at New York City, and therefore pointed directly at the Americans." The unparalleled battleship was now ready to serve its grandiose purpose. Musashi was commissioned on August 5, 1942, and assigned to the 1st Battleship Division with her sister Yamato. Later on, she was modified to serve as the flagship for the combined fleet. After spending the rest of 1942 working up, the battleship was transferred to Truk in early 1943. That year, Musashi embarked on several sorties with her fleet, searching for American forces in the area to no avail. Then, in early 1944, an American submarine torpedoed the behemoth, and she was forced to return to Japan. During the repairs, the Navy upgraded her anti-aircraft armament. Her 15.5-centimeter wing turrets were replaced with 3 triple 25mm gun mounts each. In addition, 16 triple 25mm mounts and 25 single mounts were added. The ship's light anti-aircraft armament now consisted of 115 guns. First and last combat. Throughout the year, Musashi served as a transport, transferring forces and equipment between Japan and its occupied territories. And while she was present at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June of 1944, she never came into contact with American surface forces. By mid-October, Musashi traveled to Brunei Bay in Borneo, ready to join the main Japanese fleet. The Americans had landed in Leyte, and the Imperial Navy prepared a counterattack known as Operation Show 1. They then sailed for the Philippines on the 22nd. 2 days later, Musashi would engage in her first real combat experience. While transiting the Sibuyan Sea, a U.S. reconnaissance aircraft spotted the Japanese fleet. The battleship was engulfed by a flock of Curtiss Helldivers and Grumman Avengers 2 hours later. A bomb then struck turret number 1, but caused no harm. But 2 minutes later, a torpedo struck her starboard. Musashi swallowed 3,000 long tons of water and listed over 5 degrees. However, her counter-flooding compartments compensated for the damage and reduced the listing to only 1 degree. It wasn't long before another squadron of Helldivers charged against the vessel. A rain of bombs poured on the battleship, which was now severely damaged and lowered her speed. A relentless spread of torpedoes soon followed, and another group of 29 Hellcats soon arrived to drop their payloads. A final round of torpedoes then settled Musashi's fate, whose bow was now down 13 feet. After several more airstrikes from an estimated 19 torpedoes and 17 bombs, the Japanese fleet abandoned Musashi to fend for herself and returned roughly an hour later to watch her go down. Her list eventually reached 30 degrees, and she then capsized and sank in one piece, taking less than half of her crew with her. When her wreck was found in 2015 by an expert team sponsored by Microsoft co-founder Paul Allen, it was concluded that the battleship had never been as impenetrable as the Japanese believed, a crucial mistake that cost them too much. Ironically, the most impressive battleship in human history was too late for the battleship era. As she went down, she took with her the age of sea warfare and gave way to modern aerial combat, which she was never built to withstand. Still, Musashi remains a proud achievement for the Japanese. As Robert Kraft, director of subsea operations of the rescue team, expressed, quote, "Musashi was the pride of the Japanese fleet. It was so important to the Japanese people that they didn't even inform the population that it had sunk." Thank you for watching our video. Please let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed it, don't forget to give us a like. Also subscribe to all our Dark Documentaries channels and stay tuned for more historical anecdotes.